We're talking about the power of physical touch and hugging with the news that King Charles hugged more on his tour of Australia and Samoa in that short time than his mother did in 70 years, and looking at the importance of hugging and touching to your psyche. Which brings us very nicely to our faith panel. Two fantastic faith panelists today. Joining me today are the Reverend Chris Low, Anglican priest and author, and Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, Jewish educator and faith consultant, both joining me. Two subjects that we're going to be dealing with. The first is we have Diwali coming up. I think it's October the 31st that the Festival of Light will start. And then, of course, later on in November, you have Thanksgiving, which is another festival bringing people together. There are the lighting of candles. Where I'm coming from with all of this, I want to ask, can light ever get rid of the dark? King Charles, and I just mentioned him there, saying, openly saying, having regrets about the past or apologising and hugging. And can that warmth and love and light, where all of these festivals, all of the rituals and candle lighting, is it enough to extinguish the dark? And should we extinguish the dark? I mean, something like, should we just have fun with Thanksgiving and forget about the massacres of the settlers coming to America caused and what have you? Is it just like, be happy, forget the darkness? I'm going to throw that at you, Reverend, first and foremost.
Wow, that's a heck of a lot.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
Well, can light extinguish dark? Try switching out every single light until you're in total blackness and then striking a match. And you have your answer. Mm. Where there is light, darkness cannot take over. And I think, yes, you talked about all these touchy-feely things. I'm a touchy-feely person. I'm a hugger. But can they make up for, can they get rid of the darkness? No, they can't of themselves. They're simply expressions of love, of concern, of willingness to try, in my opinion. It's something we have to keep working on from generation to generation. I'm sure Jeremy will be able to speak far more fluently than I can about all that the Jewish community has suffered and is still suffering throughout our world. But as a woman, and now a woman priest, I can talk about what women have suffered through prejudice through the years. And that still goes on. That still exists in many, many forms. And I think the only way we change that is by allowing love to replace hate. And that happens sometimes one person, one family, one community at a time.
I think you make a very good point, because many people feel that sort of almost helpless. Well, what can I do to change anything? And I remember at my Sunday school a picture of a very blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, but I am the light, and the way and the truth and what have you. Yes. And that, having a light in the dark, that painting I can still remember of Jesus with the lantern in a very dark night. And it's sort of an image that I've held with me about, and I've tried to sort of pass on during my career and in my life, is shining a light on things. So what does the individual person need to do in order to feel that they can make a difference?
There are lots of different ways. Let me give you one small example. You've talked about Thanksgiving and Diwali, and of course we've got Halloween coming up, which has actually an Americanized festival that's taken over from All Saints, All Souls, and so on, which is a Christian festival celebrating the holy martyrs, those who've died, and those who we mourn. if you think about that and the way people celebrate Halloween at the moment, here in Sheffield, for example, and in many other dioceses, we've taken a different stance. We have streets of light. So Christians are encouraged to light up their windows with messages of love, with messages of hope, and welcome the trick-or-treaters. Be really, really welcoming and give them nice gifts and food and all sorts of things. And we will give them to a little booklet about Jesus. So that's one tiny way that you can make a difference. Other ways, you can help at food banks and other places like that, where there will be all kinds of minority groups who need help, and get to know the asylum seekers, listen to their stories, get to know those people who are on the edge, and see them as people.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Chris. Rabbi, what are your thoughts on this?
Gosh, well, let me come in first and say I also like a good hug. Not so I would never describe myself as touchy-feely, but it's nice to feel that warmth, and sometimes demonstrable is better than just words, and to feel it. Don't speak of love, show me, from My Fair Lady. My mind for a moment there. So the idea of light is very important in Judaism. Obviously coming up around the end of the year, we have Hanukkah, which is our festival of light. And it is a festival of redemption and increasing candles each of the 8 days. The Talmud says to show how we build towards holiness. And the image is right. You strike a candle, strike a match in a place of darkness, and with a little bit of time, you can see an awful lot. Depending on your night vision, but you really can. With all that, I think there is an idea of sur meirava aseh tov, depart from evil and do good, bringing light into the world, which is critical. But as Chris suggested, we shouldn't forget the past, and we're talking about remembrance shortly. Poppy Day is part of remembrance. Reconciliation with the ill and evil that has befallen us within our gender, within our sexuality, within our race, within our nationality, understanding the hurt that we have caused to others, as well as the hurt that has been caused to us. I've got 2,000 years of good Jewish history of bad afflictions and pogroms and the Bible behind it. At some point, there will also need to be a reconciliation of harm and hurt that has existed in the same way as it happened in South Africa, or is happening, and in Ireland, and in New Zealand, and in Australia. There will need to be a reconciliation between the hurt that has been caused by Jewish people to Muslims and Muslim people to Jews within the different countries that we inhabit, and racism beyond that. It's really important. I think there's a beautiful idea that comes out of the beginning of Genesis that we read yesterday in synagogue. And God creates light first of all. He's let there be light. And then we have the luminaries, the sun and the moon, which it says are to govern the day and govern the night. And the word that is used in the Hebrew, which I believe is the original text, is for govern is mamshalah. It's the same as the word that is used for government in Hebrew today, but it contains the same root as the word mashal, meaning story or parable. The light, and this is not an original idea, this comes from deep Jewish commentary, the light with which we look at our history and look at our present day gives us the parable, the narrative by which we live our lives. And it is really important that we use a prism of light that recognizes the darkness around, or recognizes the darkness behind us, as we build a way forwards. So important to acknowledge, important to move on, important to do it demonstrably, and that includes giving people a hug.
Thank you both. We're going to take a break, and after the break, as you mentioned, Remembrance Day
is Talk.
Welcome back to my lovely faith panel today. Joining us are Reverend Chris Low, Anglican priest and author, and Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, Jewish educator and faith consultant. Remembrance Day, Monday, November the 11th. Now, lest we forget, just thinking about that through the lens of faith, when it comes to war, what is it we continuously fail to remember? I had a quick reminder, you know, I'm a bit of a nerd, and it figures to me, I think there's a lot that we forget. For instance, 1.2 million Indians who volunteered, including the 83,000 Sikhs who were killed or wounded, the number of American Jewish troops who fought, more than 200,000, all of the Muslim troops. We forget about that, that amongst the Indian army, there were a substantial number of Muslim fighters who fought for Britain, and then the Caribbean. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, actually won a medal fighting some 10,000. We tend to forget about that. Do we forget about the lessons of war? We talk about lest we forget. So I'm asking my faith panel, starting with you, Rabbi, what do you think it is we forget about war? And wars and fighting continues, because if we truly remembered the horrific nature of war, would we ever fight them again? We wouldn't get involved, would we?
I wish that were true. Unfortunately, a number of my family are currently on active service and have been deployed previously and worry that it might happen again. So none of them enjoy what they are experiencing. None of them enjoy what they're seeing. With a view to history, I had family fighting on both sides of the First World War. And I don't think, fortunately, they weren't shooting at each other. Otherwise, my life might have been very different. But they were there. Sometimes we see war only through the eyes of the victor and the history that is taught, and a lot of truth about families and lives that were destroyed is totally lost and forgotten. And I think that's shame. It's happened to much of Jewish life in the Holocaust, but has happened throughout history many, many times over. The idea of remembering and not forgetting is something that comes straight out of the Bible and Deuteronomy, and when it's talking about war, remembering the evil of Amalek also. So separating ourselves from those things which are bad. But one of the key ideas, the Jewish king like Solomon and David, needed to write not only the one Sefer Torah, scroll of the law, that everyone is expected to write in Jewish law, but they had to write a second personal scroll and carry that scroll in their bosom when they went out into war. And the Torah says, so that you do not forget. So that you do not forget what? So that you don't forget the principles within it, that peace is better, that you should recognize that every human being is created in the Spirit of God, that strange laws in the Torah, you should take a paddle into battle so that you can dig a latrine. And you're not supposed to just destroy the world around you and lay it ravage. You're supposed to maintain certain standards of decency and human conduct. It's very difficult in war. And when it happens, I've spoken to soldiers, when it happens, it is very difficult to maintain moral certainty and that compass. And remembering it, keeping it close to you, is something that I think is really important. So the dignity of man and the dignity of our enemies is something that we should reflect when we go into
Wow.
war.
Thank you. Very powerful. Reverend Chris, what are your thoughts on that? Lest we forget. What do we continuously forget?
I think we forget sometimes our own humanity and the humanity of others. It's difficult, I suppose, if you have no faith, but people of faith know better. We all have that teaching. Jeremy and I share the first 5 books, the Pentateuch of the Bible. And as he was talking, I was thinking of God telling David that he would not be allowed to build the temple for the Ark of the Covenant as he longed and wished to do to glorify God, because his hands were red with blood from battle, and it would be his son who would actually build the temple. It's very clear through our teachings as Christians that fighting people is not the better way, but it is also recognized that sometimes, in order to fulfill the other teachings of Jesus, to care for those who are disadvantaged in many ways, to look after the poor, to look after the weak, to stand for justice, and so on, sometimes the only way is to fight. Although there are Christians who would totally disagree with me and say, no, a Christian should never take up arms against anyone. And there are many who in past wars have gone to their death rather than do so. So strong was their faith and belief that this was the right way. So it's something that we're never ever going to agree on properly. But I do think it's so important that we do learn from the past. We do look at the horrors that have been committed and look at what's happening today and how we can change things and how we can look at better ways of solving the problems, of coming to solutions, rather than the knee-jerk reaction, which it can sometimes be, of picking up arms and fighting.
And just, one of the things that, as you're speaking, we've talked about what you would change in schools before. What is something if you, off the top of your head, that some sort of course, I mean, I loved history at school. Not all children do it to, different levels. But is there something we can pass on to our children to, I don't know, divert them from that knee-jerk, got to get you back reaction?
Well, there's a lot happening in schools these days where you will find that teachers are constantly encouraging children to be kind to one another, to care for one another. And that's where it begins, to recognize one another as fellow human beings, to be caring and kind and considerate. That's where it can begin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's already happening. This is something that I know in this country and also in New Zealand, where my younger granddaughter is. It's a central thing to their education system as well. Be kind, be thoughtful. Going back to what Jesus taught, love one another.
Yeah.
Think about,
Thank you, Chris.
Want to be treated. It's a mindset we need to get into.
I couldn't agree with you more. And a final word from you, Rabbi, on that. If you could pluck something from your faith, that a lesson that children need in order not to, knee-jerk, I'll get you back, fight before thinking and seeing the other person as, your equal.
Oh gosh, well, I grew up as a Gilbert and Sullivan Victorian with a love of all the romantic stories. And given my dad was born in Leeds, I thought Robin Hood was absolutely great. Only to discover later in life that the Crusaders were doing horrible things to Jewish and Muslim communities in the Holy Land, and King John was actually far better for the Jews. A complete change of 1066 and all that and everything I've learned. My late grandfather taught me, don't win short-term victories to make long-term enemies. And that's his wisdom born of his experience. But I think it also comes out of biblical teaching, which is to honor my holy name and not to profane it. Sometimes the knee-jerk reaction, which feels right, is so terribly wrong. And God is not edified, and nor are we when we do it. So always take pause and wonder, am I doing this for now, or am I doing this for the long term?
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you so much for that's our final faith panel, and what an amazing faith panel we had. Reverend Chris Low, Anglican priest and author, and Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, Jewish educator and faith consultant.